At 2:47 a.m., when my husband's phone buzzed for the 15th time with Victoria lighting up the screen, I made a decision that would transform me from the overlooked wife into the woman who dismantled his entire world piece by piece. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Catherine Matthews, and until that sleepless Tuesday night in March, I believed I was living the life I had carefully constructed over 18 years of marriage. At 43, I had become the embodiment of what society expects from a successful executive's wife: impeccably dressed, socially graceful, and professionally invisible. What my husband Michael never discovered was that the woman who managed his household with seamless efficiency possessed a master's degree in forensic accounting and had once been considered one of the most promising financial investigators on the East Coast. The irony of my situation was not lost on me, as I lay in our king-sized bed, in our Westchester County estate, listening to the persistent buzzing of Michael's phone on his nightstand. For nearly 2 decades, I had voluntarily surrendered my career investigating corporate fraud to support his ascension through the ranks of Sterling Capital Management, one of Manhattan's most prestigious investment firms. The woman who had once unraveled million-dollar embezzlement schemes now spent her days coordinating charity galas and managing domestic staff, her analytical skills relegated to optimizing household budgets and social calendar. Michael had always appreciated my organizational capabilities and attention to detail, qualities that made me invaluable in managing the complex social and professional obligations that accompanied his executive position. What he never comprehended was that these same abilities represented merely the surface manifestation of investigative skills that could dismantle financial conspiracies and expose hidden relationships with surgical precision. The forensic accounting techniques I had mastered during my previous career remained sharp despite years of disuse, waiting beneath the veneer of domestic tranquility like sophisticated software running in the background of my consciousness. Our marriage had followed a predictable trajectory from the passionate romance of our early 20s to the comfortable partnership of middle age. Michael's career demands required extensive travel, late-night client dinners, and weekend conferences that gradually normalized his frequent absences from our shared life. I had adapted to these requirements with the same methodical approach I brought to every aspect of our household management, creating systems and routines that maintained stability during his absences while ensuring his professional success remained the family's primary focus. The transformation from ambitious professional to supportive spouse had occurred so gradually that I could not identify any specific moment when I had consciously chosen to abandon my own career aspiration. Instead, the change had evolved through countless small decisions and accommodations, each seeming reasonable and temporary in isolation but collectively representing a fundamental restructuring of my identity and potential. By the time our daughter Emma was born, my investigative career had become a distant memory, replaced by the immediate demands of managing a household that served as the foundation for Michael's professional advancement. Emma, now 16 and thriving at her exclusive preparatory academy, represented the one aspect of our family life that provided unqualified satisfaction. Her academic excellence and leadership qualities suggested she would never face the choice between personal ambition and family obligation that had defined my own adult experience. I had ensured she understood the importance of financial independence and professional achievement, lessons I hoped would prevent her from replicating the compromises that had shaped my marriage. The estate we inhabited in Scarsdale served as both sanctuary and showcase, a carefully curated environment that reflected Michael's status within Manhattan's financial elite. The Georgian colonial mansion, with its manicured gardens and professionally decorated interior, hosted regular gatherings for Michael's colleagues and clients, events that required precise coordination and flawless execution. These entertaining obligations had provided me with extensive exposure to conversations about high-stakes financial transactions, merger negotiations, and market strategies that would have cost thousands of dollars to access through traditional professional development channels. During these social gatherings, I observed the communication patterns and decision-making processes of individuals who managed billions in assets while maintaining the invisible presence that hostess duties require. The investment professionals who gathered in our living room discussed proprietary strategies and confidential client information with the casual assumption that their hostess possessed neither the knowledge nor the inclination to understand their sophisticated operation. Their comfort with my presence had created an inadvertent education in contemporary financial markets that supplemented my formal training with real-world insights into current practices and emerging trends. The guests who attended our dinner parties and cocktail receptions represented the highest levels of Manhattan's financial hierarchy, individuals whose decisions affected global markets and institutional investment. Their conversations revealed not only technical strategies, but also the ethical compromises and regulatory violations that occasionally accompanied their pursuit of exceptional return. As I ensured their wine glasses remained full and their appetizer plates were continuously replenished, I absorbed information about market manipulation, insider trading, and client fund misappropriation that would have provided compelling evidence for regulatory investigation. This exposure to financial industry practices had maintained my understanding of forensic accounting principles while providing contemporary context for how sophisticated fraud schemes operated within current regulatory frameworks. The theoretical knowledge I had gained during my formal education, combined with practical insights gathered during years of entertaining financial executives, had created a comprehensive understanding of both legitimate investment strategies and the subtle variations that constituted criminal activity. Michael's own work at Sterling Capital Management involved managing portfolios for ultra-high net worth individuals, relationships that required discretion and sophistication that he had developed through years of careful cultivation. His success in this field had earned him recognition as one of the firm's most valuable senior associates, a position that provided substantial income and social status, while creating expectations for continued advancement toward partnership. The pressure to maintain and expand his client base had intensified during recent years as competition within the industry had become increasingly aggressive. The lifestyle that Michael's success had enabled required constant maintenance and strategic investment. Our social calendar included charitable board commitments, cultural institution memberships, and professional networking obligations that demanded significant time and financial resources. The designer clothing, luxury vehicles, and exclusive vacation destinations that marked our social position represented both rewards for Michael's professional achievement and necessary investments in maintaining the image that his continued success required. These material benefits had provided compensation for the career I had abandoned, though the exchange had never felt entirely equitable. While Michael's professional recognition continued to expand along with his compensation and social status, my own identity had become increasingly defined by my relationship to his success rather than my individual capabilities and achievement. The forensic accounting expertise that had once defined my professional identity had become an invisible asset that contributed to household management, but received no external recognition or validation. The evening that would transform our family's trajectory had begun like countless others, with Michael returning home late from what he described as a client dinner that had extended longer than anticipated. His explanation for the delayed arrival carried the casual confidence of someone who had never been questioned about his professional obligations, a pattern that had become so established that I rarely sought additional details about his business activity. The trust that had characterized our marriage during its early years had evolved into a practical acceptance of his professional demands that required minimal oversight or investigation. As we prepared for bed following his return, Michael's behavior exhibited subtle changes that my trained eye for detecting deception could not entirely dismiss. His usual chattiness about client interactions and office politics was replaced by vague responses and expedited bedtime routines that suggested distraction or preoccupation. The phone that typically remained on his dresser during sleep had been positioned on his nightstand with unusual care, as though he anticipated communications that might require immediate attention. The persistent buzzing that began shortly after midnight carried an urgency that distinguished it from the occasional emergency calls that sometimes interrupted our sleep during periods of market volatility. The frequency and timing of the notifications suggested personal rather than professional communication, a pattern that activated investigative instincts I had not utilized in nearly 2 decades. As the notifications continued through the early morning hours, each accompanied by the brief illumination of a woman's name on the screen, I realized that my comfortable assumptions about our marriage were about to undergo systematic examination. The decision to answer Michael's phone represented more than curiosity about his late-night communication. It marked the moment when my dormant professional skills would be reactivated in service of uncovering a truth that would challenge everything I believed about our family's stability and future. The forensic accounting techniques that had once exposed corporate fraud would now be applied to investigating the man who had shared my bed for 18 years, an investigation that would reveal deceptions far more sophisticated and damaging than any financial crime I had previously encountered. The woman whose name continued to illuminate Michael's phone screen would soon discover that she had chosen to involve herself with a man whose wife possessed investigative capabilities that could dismantle her comfortable assumptions about their relationship. More importantly, Michael would learn that the supportive spouse he had taken for granted was actually a strategic thinker whose patience and preparation could transform apparent vulnerability into devastating advantage. As I reached for the phone that would provide the first evidence of Michael's betrayal, I understood that the comfortable life I had built through 18 years of compromise and accommodation was about to undergo complete reconstruction. The woman who had voluntarily surrendered her professional identity to support her husband's success was about to reclaim her capabilities in service of protecting her own interests and securing her daughter's future. The foundation of deception that Michael and his lover had constructed would prove no match for the investigative expertise they had never suspected existed within the walls of our Scarsdale estate. Their carefully planned affair was about to encounter the methodical analysis of someone who understood exactly how to expose hidden relationships and financial misconduct with the precision that had once made me invaluable to corporate investigation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The comfortable assumptions that had governed our marriage for nearly 2 decades were about to be subjected to the same rigorous examination I had once applied to complex fraud schemes. Michael's confidence in his ability to maintain dual relationships would soon be tested against the investigative capabilities of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of uncovering truth through systematic analysis and strategic patience. The phone that buzzed insistently in the darkness of our bedroom would become the first piece of evidence in an investigation that would transform me from overlooked wife to strategic architect of justice. The woman who had spent 18 years supporting her husband's professional advancement was about to demonstrate that her own capabilities extended far beyond the domestic sphere where they had been confined. The foundation of our marriage, built on trust and mutual support, would be systematically examined and reconstructed according to principles of transparency and accountability that Michael had never anticipated facing within his personal relationship. The investigation that would begin with a simple decision to answer his phone would ultimately reveal not only the extent of his deception, but also the sophisticated planning required to maintain dual lives without detection. The journey that would transform apparent betrayal into strategic advantage was about to begin, guided by investigative principles that would prove more powerful than the deception they were designed to expose. Michael and his lover had unknowingly chosen to deceive someone whose professional training had prepared her to uncover exactly the type of systematic dishonesty they believed they could maintain indefinitely. The foundation of deception they had constructed would soon encounter the methodical investigation of someone who understood that the most effective response to betrayal was not emotional confrontation, but strategic preparation that could transform apparent weakness into decisive advantage. The voice that answered Michael's phone at 2:47 a.m. belonged to someone who had clearly been expecting his call, not mine. Victoria Ashford spoke with the casual intimacy of someone who had grown comfortable with late-night conversations, her tone shifting from sultry anticipation to startled confusion within the span of a single greeting. The brief exchange that followed provided me with my first concrete evidence of the relationship that had been developing beneath the surface of our apparently stable marriage, but more importantly, it activated investigative instincts that had remained dormant for nearly 2 decades. Victoria's immediate assumption that Michael was calling her at such an unusual hour suggested a pattern of communication that extended far beyond professional consultation or casual friendship. Her intimate tone and the personal nature of her initial comments revealed a relationship that had progressed to the point where late-night contact was not only acceptable but anticipated. The shock in her voice when she realized she was speaking to Michael's wife indicated that she understood exactly what discovery of their relationship would mean for all parties involved. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds before Victoria disconnected the call, but those brief moments provided sufficient information to begin constructing a preliminary assessment of the situation. Her familiarity with Michael's schedule, her knowledge of his travel plans, and her assumption that he would be available for personal conversation during the early morning hours suggested a relationship that had been developing over months rather than weeks. The sophistication of her surprise indicated someone who had given considerable thought to the potential consequences of discovery. Rather than confronting Michael immediately or allowing emotional responses to drive my decision-making, I applied the systematic approach that had once made me effective in corporate fraud investigation. The initial evidence suggested a pattern of deception that would require comprehensive documentation before any confrontational action could be strategically sound. Emotional reactions, while understandable, would compromise my ability to gather the complete information necessary to protect my interests and plan an appropriate response. The phone call had provided me with Victoria's full name, a piece of information that would serve as the foundation for a comprehensive background investigation. The forensic accounting techniques I had mastered during my professional career included methods for developing detailed profiles of individuals involved in financial misconduct, skills that could be readily adapted to investigating personal relationships and hidden activity. The systematic approach that had once exposed embezzlement schemes would now be applied to uncovering the full scope of my husband's betrayal. Michael's phone contained additional evidence beyond the late-night call that had initially alerted me to the situation. His text message history revealed a pattern of communication that extended back several months, with increasing frequency and intimacy that demonstrated the gradual development of their relationship. The messages progressed from professional courtesy to personal interest to explicit romantic communication that left no doubt about the nature of their connection. The digital evidence available through Michael's devices represented only the beginning of what would become a comprehensive investigation into his activities and relationship. The forensic accounting principles I had learned during my formal education emphasized the importance of developing multiple sources of verification for any significant finding. A thorough investigation would require financial records, travel documentation, professional communications, and lifestyle analysis that could provide independent confirmation of the relationship's scope and duration. The financial implications of Michael's affair extended beyond simple infidelity to encompass potential asset dissipation that could affect my security and Emma's future educational funding. The forensic accounting techniques I had once used to trace hidden corporate assets would be essential for determining whether Michael had used family resources to support his relationship with Victoria. The luxury lifestyle that our family maintained required substantial ongoing investment, and any diversion of funds to support an extramarital relationship would represent a form of financial fraud that demanded immediate investigation. Victoria Ashford's professional background required systematic research to understand her position and potential motivations for involving herself with a married man. The preliminary information I gathered through online professional networks revealed that she worked as a marketing consultant for high-end financial services firms, a position that would have provided her with access to Michael's professional circle and understanding of his economic status. Her specialty in luxury brand marketing suggested someone who understood the lifestyle expectations and social dynamics that characterized our economic demographic. The investigation into Victoria's background revealed sophisticated planning that extended beyond casual romantic interest to encompass strategic positioning within Manhattan's financial services community. Her client base included several firms that competed directly with Sterling Capital Management, creating potential conflicts of interest that suggested her relationship with Michael might serve professional as well as personal objectives. The complexity of these interconnected relationships indicated that simple infidelity might be only one component of a more elaborate scheme. Victoria's apartment lease documents, which I obtained through investigative techniques learned during my forensic accounting career, revealed financial arrangements that exceeded what her consulting income could reasonably support. The luxury Manhattan address and expensive furnishings suggested either undisclosed income sources or financial support from wealthy clients or romantic partner. The timeline of her lease coincided with the beginning of her relationship with Michael, raising questions about whether family assets had been used to subsidize her lifestyle. The systematic investigation that began with a single phone call evolved into a comprehensive examination of Michael's activities, communications, and financial transactions over the preceding 18 months. The forensic accounting techniques I applied to this personal investigation matched the rigor and sophistication of corporate fraud examinations, producing documentation that would support legal proceedings while protecting my interest during any future divorce negotiation. Michael's travel records revealed patterns that contradicted his reported business activities, with personal trips and extended stays that aligned with Victoria's schedule rather than Sterling Capital's client meeting. The expense reports he submitted for these travels contained irregularities that suggested personal activities were being disguised as business expenses, a form of fraud that could have serious professional consequences if reported to his employers or tax authority. The credit card statements that I accessed through our joint financial accounts provided detailed evidence of expenditures that supported the relationship with Victoria. Restaurant charges, hotel bookings, jewelry purchases, and luxury gift transactions created a comprehensive timeline of their developing relationship while documenting the family resources that had been diverted to support Michael's extramarital activity. The total amount of misappropriated funds exceeded what could be dismissed as incidental expenses, representing systematic theft of marital assets. The investigation also revealed that Michael had established separate financial accounts and credit facilities that were designed to conceal his expenditures related to the affair. These hidden accounts demonstrated premeditation and sophisticated planning that extended far beyond spontaneous romantic involvement to encompass deliberate financial fraud against our marital partnership. The complexity of these arrangements indicated that Michael had been planning his dual life for months before taking action. The professional implications of Michael's relationship with Victoria extended beyond personal infidelity to encompass potential ethical violations that could threaten his position at Sterling Capital Management. The firm's compliance policies explicitly prohibited relationships that could create conflicts of interest or compromise client confidentiality, regulations that Michael's affair clearly violated. Victoria's connections to competing firms amplified these concerns, creating grounds for termination that could destroy his career prospects within the financial services industry. The evidence I accumulated during the first week of investigation exceeded what would be necessary to prove Michael's infidelity in divorce proceedings, but the systematic approach I maintained would provide strategic advantages that emotional confrontation could never achieve. The comprehensive documentation of his financial misconduct, professional ethical violations, and systematic deception created leverage that would prove invaluable when the time came to negotiate the terms of our separation. The motivational significance of this systematic discovery phase cannot be overstated for anyone who finds themselves facing betrayal or deception in their personal relationship. The emotional trauma of discovering infidelity creates natural tendencies toward immediate confrontation or emotional breakdown, responses that can compromise long-term strategic interests while providing temporary emotional satisfaction. The application of professional investigative techniques to personal situations demonstrates how intellectual capabilities can overcome emotional vulnerability while protecting future security and interest. The transformation from betrayed spouse to strategic investigator required emotional discipline and intellectual rigor that drew upon capabilities I had developed during my professional career but had never applied to personal relationships. The systematic approach that had once exposed corporate fraud proved equally effective for uncovering personal deception, validating the value of maintaining professional skills even during periods when they seem irrelevant to current circumstances. The investigation also revealed the importance of maintaining strategic patience and comprehensive preparation when facing complex personal challenges. The temptation to confront Michael immediately after discovering his affair would have provided emotional satisfaction while compromising my ability to gather complete information and develop an optimal response strategy. The systematic approach that characterized effective fraud investigations proved equally valuable for managing personal betrayal in ways that protected long-term interests. The hidden capabilities that Michael had never recognized in his supportive wife were now being applied to systematically dismantling the deception he believed he could maintain indefinitely. The forensic accounting skills that had once exposed million-dollar embezzlement schemes were proving devastatingly effective against the relatively simple fraud represented by his extramarital relationship and associated financial misconduct. The evidence accumulation phase demonstrated how apparent vulnerability could be transformed into strategic advantage through the application of professional expertise and systematic thinking. The woman who appeared to be an unsuspecting victim of marital betrayal was actually conducting a sophisticated investigation that would provide comprehensive documentation of misconduct, while maintaining the element of surprise that would prove crucial for strategic timing. Victoria's confidence in her relationship with Michael and his confidence in his ability to maintain dual lives without detection were about to encounter the systematic analysis of someone whose professional training had prepared her to expose exactly the type of sophisticated deception they believed they could sustain indefinitely. The comfortable assumptions that governed their affair would soon be subjected to the rigorous examination that had once made me invaluable to corporate fraud investigation. The foundation of evidence that emerged from this systematic discovery phase would support the strategic response that would ultimately transform apparent betrayal into decisive advantage. The investigation that began with a simple decision to answer Michael's phone had evolved into a comprehensive examination that would provide the documentation necessary to protect my interests while exposing the full scope of his systematic deception. The third week of my investigation revealed the true scope of capabilities that 18 years of apparent domestic tranquility had concealed from Michael and everyone else in our social circle, while maintaining the facade of the devoted wife managing household affairs and social obligations. I was simultaneously conducting the most sophisticated forensic analysis of my career, applying advanced investigative techniques to systematically deconstruct the elaborate deception that Michael and Victoria believed they had constructed beyond detection. The forensic accounting methodologies that had once exposed complex corporate fraud schemes proved devastatingly effective when applied to personal relationships and hidden financial activity. The systematic approach I employed during this phase exceeded anything I had undertaken during my professional career, combining traditional financial analysis with modern digital forensics and behavioral pattern recognition that created a comprehensive profile of their affair and its broader implications. Michael's confidence in his ability to compartmentalize his dual relationships stemmed from his fundamental misunderstanding of the woman he had married. He perceived me as someone whose intellectual capabilities were limited to managing household logistics and coordinating social events, never recognizing that these activities represented merely the surface application of analytical skills that could be redirected toward far more complex objectives. His 18-year experience of my voluntary professional invisibility had convinced him that my forensic accounting expertise had atrophied through disuse, when in reality those capabilities had been refined and enhanced through years of observing financial industry practices during our social entertainment. The investigation techniques I employed during this phase incorporated advanced methodologies that had been developed since my departure from professional practice, innovations I had learned through careful observation of conversations during our dinner parties and networking events. The financial executives who had gathered in our home over the years had unknowingly provided me with continuing education in contemporary fraud detection methods, regulatory compliance requirements, and investigative technologies that supplemented my formal training with current industry best practices. Victoria Ashford's digital footprint provided a comprehensive view of her lifestyle, professional activities, and personal relationships that revealed patterns of behavior extending far beyond her involvement with Michael. The social media analysis I conducted demonstrated sophisticated manipulation techniques that suggested she had previously engaged in similar relationships with married men in positions of financial authority. Her strategic positioning within Manhattan's financial services community appeared designed to provide access to wealthy clients and executives who might serve her personal and professional objectives. The financial analysis that formed the core of my investigation revealed systematic asset diversion, that exceeded simple affair-related expenses to encompass what appeared to be deliberate wealth transfer disguised as business activities. Michael had established complex financial arrangements that channeled family resources through multiple intermediary accounts before reaching Victoria, a scheme that demonstrated premeditation and sophistication that elevated his misconduct from simple marital infidelity to systematic financial fraud that could have serious legal consequences. The professional network analysis I conducted revealed that Victoria's consulting business served as front for activities that extended beyond legitimate marketing services to encompass what appeared to be industrial espionage and client poaching operations, targeting Sterling Capital Management and its competitors. Her access to confidential client information through her relationship with Michael provided her with strategic intelligence that she was systematically monetizing through her consulting practice, creating conflicts of interest that violated numerous professional regulations and potentially constituted criminal misconduct. The travel pattern analysis that I developed through examination of credit card records, hotel reservations, and airline bookings revealed a sophisticated coordination system that allowed Michael and Victoria to maintain their relationship while minimizing detection risk. Their meeting schedules were carefully orchestrated to coincide with legitimate business travel, creating alibis that would withstand casual scrutiny while providing them with luxury accommodations and experiences funded through misappropriated family assets. The communication pattern analysis that I conducted through examination of phone records, email metadata, and messaging applications revealed operational security measures that demonstrated awareness of potential discovery risks and systematic efforts to minimize digital evidence. Their communication protocols included code words, scheduled contact windows, and encrypted messaging applications that indicated sophisticated planning and risk management that extended far beyond typical extramarital relationships. The psychological profile that emerged from this comprehensive analysis revealed that both Michael and Victoria possessed personality traits and behavioral patterns that suggested their relationship was motivated by factors extending beyond romantic attraction to encompass financial gain, professional advancement, and social positioning objectives. The systematic nature of their deception indicated long-term planning that was designed to achieve specific outcomes rather than merely pursuing emotional satisfaction or sexual fulfillment. The legal implications of the evidence I had accumulated extended far beyond divorce proceedings to encompass potential criminal charges related to fraud, embezzlement, and professional misconduct that could result in significant penalties and career destruction for both participants. The documentation I had developed would provide prosecutors with comprehensive evidence packages that could support multiple charges while protecting me from any suggestion of complicity or awareness of their illegal activity. The strategic advantage that my hidden expertise provided could not be overstated in terms of positioning for optimal outcomes during the eventual confrontation and resolution phase. While Michael and Victoria continued to operate under the assumption that their activities remained undetected, I was developing comprehensive documentation that would enable me to dictate the terms of any settlement while protecting my financial interests and Emma's educational future. The motivational significance of this expertise emergence phase demonstrates how professional capabilities that appear dormant or irrelevant can be reactivated and enhanced when circumstances demand their application. The years I had spent away from active forensic accounting practice had not diminished my investigative abilities, but had actually strengthened them through exposure to contemporary industry practices and the development of enhanced analytical perspectives that combined professional training with personal insight. The transformation from passive victim to active investigator required intellectual courage and emotional discipline that drew upon capabilities I had developed during my professional career, but had never applied under such personally challenging circumstances. The systematic approach that had once exposed corporate misconduct proved equally effective for uncovering personal betrayal while providing psychological protection against the emotional trauma that could have compromised my judgment and strategic thinking. The investigation also revealed the importance of maintaining intellectual curiosity and professional identity even during periods when external recognition and validation are absent. The forensic accounting expertise that had defined my professional identity had been preserved and enhanced during my years of apparent professional inactivity, remaining available for application when circumstances demanded their use for protecting my fundamental interests and security. The hidden capabilities that Michael had consistently underestimated were now being systematically applied to dismantling the deception he believed he had constructed beyond detection. The forensic accounting skills that had once exposed million-dollar fraud schemes were proving devastatingly effective against the relatively straightforward misconduct represented by his affair and associated financial irregularities, demonstrating how professional expertise could be adapted to address personal challenges with superior effectiveness. The evidence accumulation that occurred during this phase provided comprehensive documentation that would support strategic responses ranging from private confrontation to public exposure to legal prosecution, giving me complete control over the timing and nature of any resolution, while ensuring that my interests would be protected regardless of how Michael and Victoria chose to respond to eventual discovery. The systematic analysis that characterized this phase also revealed the psychological and emotional benefits of applying intellectual capabilities to overcome personal challenges rather than relying solely on emotional responses or social support systems. The process of conducting a professional quality investigation provided me with a sense of empowerment and control that would have been impossible to achieve through traditional counseling or support group approaches, demonstrating how intellectual engagement could serve therapeutic functions while achieving practical objectives. The comprehensive understanding of Michael and Victoria's activities that emerged from this investigation provided me with strategic intelligence that would enable optimal decision-making regarding timing, tactics, and objectives for the eventual confrontation. The systematic preparation that had characterized my approach would ensure that I entered any negotiations or legal proceedings with complete information and maximum leverage, while maintaining the element of surprise that would prevent them from implementing damage control measures. The foundation of evidence that resulted from this expertise emergence phase would support whatever resolution strategy proved most beneficial for protecting my interests and ensuring Emma's future security. The investigation that had begun with simple curiosity about late-night phone calls had evolved into a comprehensive examination that provided complete understanding of their activities while positioning me to respond with maximum effectiveness and minimum risk. The hidden expertise that had emerged during this phase represented vindication of the professional identity I had maintained despite years of external invisibility and social dismissal. The forensic accounting capabilities that others had forgotten or never recognized were now providing strategic advantages that would transform apparent vulnerability into decisive control over the situation and its ultimate resolution. Victoria's confidence in her manipulation of Michael and his confidence in his ability to maintain dual relationships without consequences were about to encounter the systematic analysis of someone whose professional training had prepared her to expose exactly the type of sophisticated deception they believed they could sustain indefinitely. Their comfortable assumptions about the naive wife who posed no threat to their carefully planned affair would soon be subjected to the rigorous examination that had once made me invaluable to complex fraud investigation. The expertise that had emerged during this phase would prove that professional capabilities, once developed, retain their power even after years of apparent dormancy, waiting for circumstances that demand their application for achieving objectives that seemed impossible through conventional approaches. The systematic investigation that began with hidden expertise was now positioned to transform apparent betrayal into strategic advantage through the methodical application of capabilities that neither Michael nor Victoria had ever suspected existed within the comfortable domestic environment they had exploited for their deceptive purposes. The fourth phase of my investigation required the most sophisticated performance of my adult life as I maintained the appearance of the unsuspecting wife while systematically documenting evidence that would ultimately destroy the comfortable assumptions Michael and Victoria had developed about their undetected affair. The psychological discipline required to continue normal household routines and social obligations while conducting a comprehensive forensic investigation demanded emotional control and strategic thinking that exceeded anything I had encountered during my professional career. Michael's behavior during this period revealed the dangerous confidence that develops when deceptive activities proceed without apparent consequences or detection. His casual attitude toward operational security gradually relaxed as weeks passed without any indication that his dual life had been discovered. The phone calls that had initially been conducted with careful attention to timing and privacy became increasingly frequent and careless, often occurring in our shared living spaces with minimal effort to conceal their intimate nature from anyone who might be listening. The false security that characterized Michael's approach to maintaining his affair extended beyond communication practices to encompass financial activities that demonstrated breathtaking disregard for potential discovery. The credit card transactions that I monitored through our joint accounts revealed increasingly expensive gestures and elaborate romantic arrangements that would have been immediately apparent to any spouse conducting even casual financial oversight. His assumption that I remained focused exclusively on household management and social coordination had convinced him that detailed financial scrutiny was unnecessary. Victoria's parallel development of operational carelessness provided additional opportunities for evidence gathering that would have been impossible if she had maintained the cautious approach that had characterized the early stages of their relationship. Her social media presence evolved to include subtle references and photographic content that could be correlated with Michael's travel schedule and expense reports, creating a comprehensive timeline of their activities that they apparently believed remained invisible to outside observation. The professional networking events that Michael attended with increasing frequency provided additional venues for their relationship while creating opportunities for me to observe their interactions within social contexts where they believed themselves safe from detection. The charity galas and industry conferences that had once served as platforms for advancing Michael's career now functioned as carefully orchestrated meetings that allowed them to maintain their affair while preserving the appearance of professional propriety. The strategic advantage of my continued invisibility during these social gatherings could not be overstated in terms of intelligence gathering opportunities. The conversations I overheard while fulfilling hostess duties or managing social logistics provided insights into their planning processes and future intentions that would have been impossible to obtain through traditional investigative methods. Their casual discussions of weekend plans, travel arrangements, and financial considerations revealed operational details that demonstrated the systematic nature of their deception. Michael's interactions with our daughter Emma during this period revealed additional dimensions of his capacity for compartmentalization and deception that provided disturbing insights into his psychological profile. His ability to maintain the appearance of devoted father while systematically betraying her mother and diverting family resources to support his affair demonstrated sophisticated emotional manipulation capabilities that suggested their relationship was built on far more complex psychological foundations than simple romantic attraction. The financial analysis that I conducted during this phase revealed systematic asset diversion that had been occurring for months longer than the communications evidence had initially suggested. The sophisticated money laundering techniques that Michael employed to disguise his expenditure indicated planning and preparation that extended far beyond spontaneous romantic involvement to encompass deliberate wealth transfer that constituted systematic theft of marital assets on a scale that would have serious legal implications. Victoria's business activities during this period revealed additional evidence of professional misconduct that extended her legal exposure beyond simple adultery to encompass potential criminal charges related to corporate espionage and client solicitation. The consulting contracts that she secured with Sterling Capital Management competitors appeared designed to provide her with access to confidential client information that she was systematically monetizing through her relationship with Mike, creating conflicts of interest that violated numerous professional regulations. The travel coordination that Michael and Victoria maintained during this phase demonstrated sophisticated logistics management that required careful attention to detail and risk assessment. Their ability to synchronize complex schedules while maintaining alibis that would withstand scrutiny from employers and family members indicated planning capabilities that elevated their affair from simple romantic involvement to systematic operational management that suggested potential application to other deceptive activities. The communication protocols that they established during this phase included backup systems and contingency plans that demonstrated awareness of potential discovery risks while revealing confidence that their current security measures were adequate for maintaining indefinite concealment. The encrypted messaging applications and scheduled communication windows that they employed indicated technological sophistication that exceeded the capabilities of most individuals conducting extramarital relationships. The psychological profiles that emerged from extended observation revealed personality characteristics and behavioral patterns that suggested both Michael and Victoria possessed traits associated with narcissistic manipulation and systematic deception that extended beyond their current relationship to encompass broader patterns of exploitative behavior. The casual manner in which they discussed the potential impact of discovery on family relationships indicated emotional detachment and strategic thinking that prioritized personal satisfaction over ethical consideration. The social dynamics that developed around their relationship during this phase revealed how their false security had infected their broader social interactions and professional activity. The increasingly bold public appearances and social media presence that characterized their behavior indicated confidence that their deception would remain undetected indefinitely, creating opportunities for documentation that would provide compelling evidence of their systematic misconduct. The evidence accumulation that occurred during this false security phase provided comprehensive documentation that exceeded what would be necessary for divorce proceedings while creating potential grounds for criminal prosecution and professional sanctions that could destroy both of their careers. The systematic nature of their financial misconduct and professional ethical violations had created legal exposure that extended far beyond simple marital dissolution to encompass serious criminal liability. The motivational significance of this false security phase demonstrates how systematic patience and strategic thinking can transform apparent weakness into decisive advantage. The emotional discipline required to maintain normal relationships and social obligations while conducting comprehensive investigation provided psychological benefits that exceeded what could be achieved through confrontational approaches or emotional expression. The intellectual engagement that characterized this phase served therapeutic functions while achieving practical objectives that would protect my long-term interests. The strategic value of maintaining the element of surprise during this phase could not be overstated in terms of positioning for optimal outcomes during eventual confrontation. The comprehensive evidence that I accumulated while Michael and Victoria continued to operate under false assumptions about detection would provide complete control over timing and tactics for any resolution, while preventing them from implementing damage control measures that could compromise my strategic position. The self-security that characterized their approach during this phase also revealed the psychological vulnerabilities that would prove decisive during confrontation. Their confidence in their deception had created emotional investment and psychological comfort that would make discovery particularly devastating while limiting their ability to respond effectively to strategic challenge. The systematic documentation of their activities during this unguarded period would provide psychological leverage that exceeded the legal implications of their misconduct. The transformation that occurred during this phase validated the strategic value of intellectual engagement and professional capability application for addressing personal challenges. The Salsikin, the forensic investigation that I conducted during this period, provided psychological empowerment and emotional control that would have been impossible to achieve through traditional support systems or therapeutic approaches. The systematic approach that characterized this phase demonstrated how professional expertise could be adapted to personal situations with superior effectiveness. The comprehensive understanding of their activities and motivations that emerged during this phase would enable optimal decision-making regarding timing and tactics for eventual revelation, while ensuring that their false security would be transformed into maximum vulnerability when confrontation became strategically advantageous. The evidence foundation that resulted from their careless behavior during this period would support whatever resolution approach proved most beneficial for protecting my interests and Emma's future security. The false security that Michael and Victoria had developed during this phase represented the psychological foundation that would make their eventual exposure particularly devastating. Their confidence in their ability to maintain indefinite deception would amplify the psychological impact of discovery while limiting their capacity for effective response to strategic challenges. The comfortable assumptions that had governed their behavior during this period would soon encounter the systematic analysis that had been developing comprehensive countermeasures while they remained focused on maintaining their elaborate charade. The operational carelessness that had characterized their approach during this false security phase had provided me with intelligence advantages that would prove decisive during confrontation. The detailed understanding of their methods, motivations, and vulnerabilities that emerged from extended observation would enable strategic responses that they could never have anticipated from the woman they continued to perceive as an unsuspecting victim of their sophisticated deception. The confidence that Michael and Victoria had developed in their ability to maintain dual relationships without consequences was about to encounter evidence of systematic investigation that would demonstrate the fundamental inadequacy of their security measures and risk assessment capabilities. False security that had characterized this phase would soon be revealed as the foundation for their complete strategic disadvantage when facing someone whose professional training had prepared her to expose exactly the type of sophisticated misconduct they believed they could sustain indefinitely. The catalyst that would transform my investigation from passive documentation to active intervention arrived through the most unexpected channel possible: Emma's academic achievements and college planning requirements. What began as routine preparation for her junior year college applications evolved into the discovery of systematic theft that threatened not only our family's financial security but also our daughter's educational future. This revelation elevated Michael's misconduct from personal betrayal to direct threat against the most important priority in our family structure. Emma's guidance counselor had scheduled our annual meeting to discuss her exceptional academic performance and the strategic planning required for applications to elite universities. Her academic record positioned her as a competitive candidate for admission to institutions including Harvard, Princeton, and Stanford, opportunities that represented the culmination of 16 years of careful educational investment and strategic positioning. The financial requirements for these educational objectives had been incorporated into our long-term planning since Emma's elementary school year. The comprehensive financial review that preceded our college planning meeting revealed discrepancies that my forensic accounting background immediately identified as systematic asset diversion on a scale that exceeded anything I had previously documented during my investigation of Michael's affair. The education savings accounts that should have contained sufficient resources for Emma's undergraduate and graduate education had been systematically depleted through unauthorized withdrawals that Michael had disguised as routine investment rebalancing activity. The sophisticated techniques that Michael had employed to conceal his theft of Emma's educational funds demonstrated financial fraud capabilities that exceeded simple expense account manipulation or credit card misuse. The systematic transfer of resources from protected educational accounts to liquid assets that could be redirected toward his relationship with Victoria required advanced understanding of financial regulations and tax implications that suggested deliberate planning rather than impulsive misconduct. The documentation that supported these unauthorized transfers revealed Michael's systematic exploitation of his position as account administrator to circumvent the protection mechanisms that had been established to preserve Emma's educational funding. The legal structures that we had implemented to ensure her academic opportunities would remain secure regardless of market volatility or family circumstances had been systematically dismantled through administrative actions that violated both fiduciary responsibilities and family agreement.
The timeline of these financial diversions corresponded precisely with the escalation of Michael's relationship with Victoria, providing clear evidence that our daughter's educational future had been sacrificed to fund his extramarital activity. The luxury experiences and expensive gifts that had characterized their affair had been financed through the systematic theft of resources that represented 16 years of careful savings and strategic investment designed to ensure Emma's academic success and professional opportunity. The psychological impact of discovering that Michael had stolen from our daughter's future to fund his affair transcended the personal betrayal that had motivated my initial investigation. The violation of parental obligations and family priorities represented a fundamental breach of values that elevated his misconduct from relationship infidelity to systematic exploitation of family trust and resources. This discovery transformed my investigation from personal interest to moral imperative that demanded immediate protective action. The legal implications of Michael's theft from Emma's educational accounts extended far beyond marital dissolution to encompass criminal charges related to fiduciary breach and systematic fraud that could result in significant penalties and career destruction. The documentation that I had developed during my investigation would provide prosecutors with comprehensive evidence packages that demonstrated premeditation and sophisticated planning while establishing clear motives and systematic execution patterns. The professional consequences of Michael's educational fund theft would prove particularly devastating given Sterling Capital Management's emphasis on fiduciary responsibility and client trust as fundamental principles of their business model. The revelation that a senior associate had systematically stolen from his own daughter's education accounts would create reputation damage that could destroy the firm's relationships with clients who entrusted their children's educational planning to the company's expertise and ethical standards. Victoria's knowledge of potential complicity in the theft of Emma's educational funds created additional legal exposure that expanded her criminal liability beyond simple adultery or professional misconduct. The luxury lifestyle and expensive gifts that she had accepted while understanding their source in stolen educational resources established her as either an active participant in criminal conspiracy or a knowing beneficiary of systematic fraud against a minor child. The emotional catalyst that this discovery created within my psychological framework transformed my strategic approach from systematic documentation to active protection of Emma's interests and future opportunity. The intellectual engagement that had characterized my investigation evolved into parental protective instincts that demanded immediate action to secure Emma's educational resources while preventing further theft or dissipation of family assets. The comprehensive financial analysis that I conducted following this discovery revealed the full scope of asset diversion that had occurred during Michael's affair, including sophisticated money laundering techniques that had disguised the true source and destination of transferred funds. The systematic nature of these transfers indicated planning and execution capabilities that suggested potential application to other fraudulent activities beyond simple educational fund. The strategic timing of this discovery provided optimal conditions for transitioning from passive investigation to active intervention while maintaining maximum strategic advantage. The comprehensive evidence that I had accumulated during the preceding months provided complete documentation of Michael's systematic misconduct, while the educational fund theft created moral imperatives that justified immediate protective action regardless of personal considerations or family stability concerns. The educational planning meeting that had revealed this theft also provided practical deadlines that created urgency for resolution of the financial irregularity. Emma's college application process required immediate access to educational resources and clear documentation of family financial status for need-based aid consideration.
The systematic theft that Michael had perpetrated created immediate practical problems that demanded resolution within specific timeframes that could not accommodate extended negotiation or gradual disclosure processes. The evidence of educational fund theft also provided psychological leverage that exceeded the impact of simple marital infidelity or professional misconduct. The violation of parental responsibilities and family priorities represented fundamental character flaws that would resonate with family members, professional colleagues, and social contacts in ways that personal relationship issues might not. The systematic theft from a child's educational future created moral clarity that simplified strategic decision-making while providing compelling narratives for any necessary public disclosure. The discovery of educational fund theft validated the strategic value of comprehensive investigation and systematic evidence gathering, rather than emotional confrontation or immediate disclosure following initial discovery of the affair. The patience and methodical approach that had characterized my investigative process had enabled discovery of far more serious misconduct that provided superior strategic positioning and legal protection, compared to what would have been available through immediate emotional response to simple relationship infidelity. The transformation of my investigation focus from personal betrayal to family protection created psychological empowerment that exceeded anything I had experienced during my professional career. The combination of intellectual engagement with maternal protective instincts provided motivation and clarity that enabled optimal decision-making, while maintaining emotional control and strategic thinking under circumstances that could easily have compromised judgment and effectiveness. Comprehensive understanding of Michael's systematic misconduct that had emerged through extended investigation now provided complete strategic advantage for protecting Emma's interests, while ensuring that his violations of family trust and fiduciary responsibility would face appropriate consequences. The educational fund theft had created moral imperatives that justified whatever actions proved necessary for protecting our daughter's future while preventing further exploitation of family resources. The catalyst that this discovery represented would prove decisive in determining the timing and nature of my transition from passive investigation to active intervention. The systematic theft of Emma's educational resources had created circumstances that demanded immediate protective action, while providing moral justification and legal grounds for comprehensive response measures that would ensure Michael's misconduct faced appropriate consequences. The false security that had characterized Michael and Victoria's recent behavior would soon encounter the protective instincts of a mother whose daughter's future had been systematically compromised to fund their elaborate deception. The comfortable assumptions that had governed their affair be subjected to the strategic response of someone whose professional training and parental motivations had combined to create capabilities that neither had ever suspected existed within the family environment they had exploited for their personal satisfaction. The educational fund theft had transformed my investigation from personal interest to family protection imperative that would drive strategic action designed to secure Emma's future while ensuring that systematic misconduct faced appropriate legal and professional consequences. The catalyst that this discovery provided would prove decisive in determining how and when their comfortable deception would be systematically dismantled through the methodical application of capabilities they had never recognized in the woman whose family they had chosen to betray and exploit. The discovery of Michael's theft from Emma's educational accounts created an internal conflict that transcended the personal betrayal I had been methodically documenting for weeks. The systematic nature of his financial misconduct demanded immediate protective action, yet the strategic advantages of continued investigation and comprehensive evidence gathering suggested that premature revelation could compromise optimal outcomes for both Emma's future security and my own long-term interests. This psychological tension between maternal urgency and strategic patience required careful analysis of competing priorities and potential consequences. The emotional impact of realizing that our daughter's academic future had been systematically compromised to fund Michael's extramarital relationship created rage and protective instincts that threatened to overwhelm the methodical approach that had characterized my investigation thus far. The violation of parental trust and family priorities represented a fundamental breach that activated psychological responses designed to ensure immediate protection of offspring, responses that could easily compromise strategic thinking and optimal decision-making if allowed to drive immediate action. The professional training that had sustained me through complex corporate fraud investigations provided frameworks for managing emotional responses while maintaining analytical clarity during high-stakes decision-making processes. The systematic approach that had once enabled me to expose sophisticated embezzlement schemes required adaptation to circumstances where personal emotional investment could compromise objective assessment of available options and their potential consequences. The intellectual discipline that had characterized my forensic accounting career became essential for navigating circumstances that combined professional complexity with deeply personal stakes. The strategic assessment that I conducted during this internal conflict phase required comprehensive evaluation of multiple scenarios and their potential outcomes across various timeframes and stakeholder interests. The immediate option of confronting Michael directly about his theft from Emma's accounts would provide emotional satisfaction while potentially compromising my ability to secure optimal long-term outcomes for both financial recovery and legal protection. The alternative approach of continued investigation and strategic preparation offered superior positioning for comprehensive resolution, while requiring additional emotional discipline during an already challenging period. The legal consultation that I pursued during this decision-making process provided essential guidance for understanding the implications of various response strategies while maintaining the confidentiality for preserving strategic advantage. The family law attorney who had handled our estate planning documentation confirmed that Michael's theft from Emma's educational accounts constituted serious criminal conduct that could support both civil recovery actions and criminal prosecution, outcomes that would provide comprehensive protection for our remaining family assets, while ensuring appropriate consequences for his systematic misconduct. The financial advisor who managed our investment portfolios provided additional perspective on the recovery options available for Emma's educational funds, while confirming the sophisticated nature of Michael's asset diversion technique. The systematic transfers that he had executed required advanced understanding of financial regulations and tax implications that suggested deliberate planning rather than impulsive decision. The documentation that I had gathered during my investigation would support comprehensive recovery efforts while providing evidence of systematic fraud that could enhance legal proceedings. The psychological counseling that I sought during this period focused on managing the emotional impact of betrayal discovery while maintaining the strategic thinking necessary for optimal decision-making under extreme stress. The therapeutic support that I received emphasized the importance of separating immediate emotional responses from long-term strategic interests, while providing techniques for maintaining psychological stability during extended periods of deception and investigation. The professional guidance helped me understand that intellectual engagement and systematic planning could serve therapeutic functions while achieving practical objectives that emotional responses alone could never accomplish. The risk assessment that characterized this decision-making phase required careful evaluation of potential negative consequences associated with various response strategies. The immediate confrontation approach carried risks of asset concealment, evidence destruction, and strategic repositioning that could compromise recovery efforts and legal proceedings. The continued investigation approach required additional emotional discipline and extended periods of deception that could affect psychological well-being while providing superior strategic positioning for comprehensive resolution. The stakeholder analysis that informed my strategic thinking during this phase emphasized the paramount importance of protecting Emma's interests while securing my own financial security and legal protection. The systematic approach that had characterized my investigation needed adaptation to accommodate the accelerated timeline created by college application deadlines, while maintaining the comprehensive evidence gathering that would support optimal legal and financial outcomes. The competing priorities required careful balancing of immediate protective needs with long-term strategic advantage. The evidence preservation that became critical during this decision-making phase required enhanced security measures to protect the comprehensive documentation that I had gathered while preventing any possibility of discovery that could prompt Michael to implement damage control measures. The forensic accounting principles that guided my investigation emphasized the importance of maintaining evidence integrity while preventing tampering or destruction that could compromise legal proceedings and recovery efforts. The communication strategy that I developed during this phase required careful consideration of timing, audience, and messaging approaches
that would maximize strategic advantage while minimizing potential negative consequences. The revelation process needed to account for Emma's emotional well-being, my own legal protection, and the preservation of evidence that would support comprehensive resolution of Michael's systematic misconduct. The strategic framework that emerged from this analysis provided clear guidance for transitioning from investigation to action while maintaining optimal positioning for all subsequent phases. The professional network activation that I initiated during this period provided essential support for managing the complex legal, financial, and emotional challenges that comprehensive response would require. The forensic accounting colleagues, who had maintained contact during my year's professional absence, confirmed their availability to provide expert testimony and technical analysis that could support legal proceedings while validating the sophisticated investigation that I had conducted independently. The professional relationships that I had preserved during my domestic years provided resources that would prove invaluable for achieving optimal outcomes. The motivational framework that sustained me during this internal conflict phase emphasized the transformation of apparent vulnerability into strategic advantage through the systematic application of professional expertise and intellectual capability. The emotional trauma of discovering systematic betrayal and theft created natural tendencies toward immediate confrontation or emotional breakdown, responses that could provide temporary satisfaction while compromising long-term strategic interest. The alternative approach of maintaining strategic patience while continuing comprehensive preparation offered superior outcomes while requiring enhanced psychological discipline. The decision-making process that characterized this phase demonstrated how professional training and intellectual capability could overcome emotional vulnerability while protecting fundamental interests and values. The forensic accounting expertise that had once exposed corporate fraud proved equally valuable for addressing personal betrayal in ways that prioritized optimal outcomes over immediate emotional satisfaction. The systematic approach that had guided my investigation provided frameworks for managing complex personal challenges with the same rigor and effectiveness that had characterized my professional career. The strategic planning that emerged from this internal conflict phase incorporated comprehensive risk assessment, stakeholder analysis, and outcome optimization that would guide the transition from passive investigation to active intervention. The decision to continue systematic evidence gathering while implementing enhanced protective measures represented the optimal balance between emotional urgency and strategic advantage, ensuring that Emma's interests would be protected while maintaining positioning for comprehensive resolution of Michael's systematic misconduct. The psychological preparation that this decision-making phase required emphasized the importance of maintaining intellectual engagement and professional identity during periods of personal crisis and challenge. The forensic investigation that I had conducted provided psychological empowerment and emotional control that traditional support systems could not have achieved while positioning me for strategic action that would protect both immediate and long-term family interests. The comprehensive assessment that characterized this internal conflict phase validated the strategic value of systematic preparation and professional capability application for addressing complex personal challenges. The emotional discipline and intellectual rigor that had sustained me through this decision-making process would prove essential for managing the confrontation and resolution phases that would follow, ensuring that Michael's systematic betrayal and theft would face appropriate consequences while protecting Emma's future and my own security. The internal conflict that had characterized this phase ultimately strengthened my resolve and enhanced my strategic positioning through comprehensive analysis of available options and their potential consequences. The systematic approach that had guided my investigation and decision-making provided psychological foundation for the active intervention phase that would transform apparent vulnerability into decisive advantage through the methodical application of capabilities that Michael and Victoria had never suspected existed within the family environment they had exploited for their personal satisfaction. The strategic decision that emerged from this comprehensive analysis would prove decisive in determining how their comfortable deception would be systematically dismantled through responses that they could never have anticipated from the woman they continued to perceive as an unsuspecting victim of their sophisticated misconduct. The internal conflict that had tested my emotional and intellectual capabilities had ultimately prepared me for strategic action that would protect family interests, while ensuring that systematic betrayal and theft would face consequences appropriate to their severity and impact. The strategic planning phase that followed my decision to pursue comprehensive intervention required the most sophisticated operational framework of my career, combining forensic accounting methodologies with legal strategy development and psychological warfare principles. The systematic approach that would guide my response needed to account for multiple objectives, including asset recovery, legal protection, evidence preservation, and optimal timing for maximum strategic advantage, while ensuring Emma's educational future remained secure throughout the process. The comprehensive analysis that formed the foundation of my strategic plan incorporated detailed assessment of Michael and Victoria's vulnerabilities, capabilities, and potential responses to various intervention approaches. The behavioral patterns that I had documented during months of observation provided essential intelligence for predicting their likely reactions to discovery, while identifying psychological pressure points that could be leveraged to achieve optimal outcomes. The sophisticated deception they had maintained required equally sophisticated countermeasures that would prevent damage control efforts while maximizing their exposure to legal and professional consequences. The legal framework that would support my strategic response required coordination with multiple specialists, including family law attorneys, criminal defense counsel, and forensic accounting experts who could provide testimony and technical analysis during potential court proceedings. The comprehensive evidence that I had gathered during my investigation would support various legal actions, ranging from civil asset recovery to criminal prosecution outcomes that required careful sequencing and coordination to achieve maximum effectiveness while preventing procedural conflicts or evidence contamination. The financial recovery strategy that represented a critical component of my overall plan required sophisticated understanding of asset protection techniques and recovery mechanisms that could overcome the complex money laundering schemes Michael had employed to disguise his theft of family resources. The forensic accounting analysis that I had conducted provided roadmaps for tracing diverted assets while identifying recovery options that could restore Emma's educational funding and protect our remaining family wealth from further exploitation. The timeline development that guided my strategic planning required careful coordination of multiple simultaneous activities, including evidence preservation, legal consultation, financial analysis, and psychological preparation for confrontation. The college application deadlines that created urgency around Emma's educational planning provided natural constraints for the overall timeline, while ensuring that protective actions would occur within timeframes that could prevent further asset diversion or evidence destruction. The communication strategy that would govern revelation and confrontation phases required sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation and negotiation principles that could achieve optimal outcomes while minimizing potential negative consequences. The approach needed to account for Michael's likely defensive responses while preventing Victoria from implementing damage control measures that could compromise legal proceedings or asset recovery efforts. The strategic messaging would need to balance emotional impact with practical demands for cooperation and disclosure. The evidence presentation framework that would support confrontation activities required organization and packaging of the comprehensive documentation I had gathered into format that would maximize psychological impact while providing clear pathways for legal action if cooperation was not forthcoming. The systematic nature of Michael's misconduct demanded presentation approaches that would demonstrate the full scope of his betrayal while preventing any possibility of minimization or rationalization that could compromise resolution efforts. The professional network activation that would provide essential support during implementation required careful selection and coordination of specialists who could provide expert analysis, legal representation, and technical assistance throughout the various phases of strategic response. The forensic accounting colleagues, who had maintained contact during my domestic years, confirmed their availability to provide expert testimony and investigative support that would validate my independent analysis while enhancing the credibility of any legal proceedings. The psychological preparation that would be essential for maintaining effectiveness during high-stress confrontation required development of emotional regulation techniques and a strategic thinking frameworks that could overcome the natural trauma responses associated with systematic betrayal discovery. The therapeutic support that I had initiated provided techniques for maintaining analytical clarity while managing the emotional impact of implementing strategic responses that would fundamentally alter family relationships and social dynamics. The contingency planning that characterized this strategic development phase required comprehensive assessment of potential complication and alternative scenarios that could emerge during implementation. The sophisticated nature of Michael and Victoria's deception suggested they might possess capabilities for damage control or counterattack that could compromise my strategic objectives, if not properly anticipated and neutralized. The planning framework needed to account for various response scenarios while maintaining flexibility for adaptation based on emerging circumstances. The asset protection measures that would be essential for preventing further theft or concealment required immediate implementation of enhanced security protocols and monitoring systems that could detect any attempts to transfer or hide family resources. The sophisticated techniques that Michael had already employed for asset diversion suggested he might attempt more aggressive concealment efforts if he suspected discovery, making preemptive protection measures essential for preserving recovery options. The documentation security that would protect the evidence I had gathered required enhanced physical and digital protection measures that could prevent tampering, theft, or destruction, while ensuring admissibility in potential court proceedings. The forensic accounting principles that had guided my investigation emphasized the importance of maintaining chain of custody and evidence integrity throughout the entire process, requirements that demanded sophisticated storage and access control systems. The stakeholder management strategy that would guide interactions with family members, professional colleagues, and social contacts required careful consideration of disclosure timing and messaging approaches that could minimize collateral damage while maintaining strategic advantage. The revelation of Michael's systematic misconduct would inevitably affect multiple relationships and social dynamics, requiring strategic communication that could protect Emma's emotional well-being while preserving my own reputation and social position. The professional reputation protection that would be essential for maintaining my own credibility and effectiveness required strategic positioning that could frame my actions as appropriate response to serious misconduct rather than vindictive reaction to personal betrayal. The forensic accounting expertise that I had applied to uncovering Michael's systematic fraud provided professional validation for my investigative activities while demonstrating competency that could support future career development if circumstances required return to professional practice. The motivational framework that sustained me during this intensive planning phase emphasized the transformation of systematic betrayal into opportunities for demonstrating professional capability and protecting fundamental family values. The comprehensive strategic response that I was developing would validate the years I had spent developing expertise that others had dismissed or forgotten, while providing practical protection for Emma's future and my own security. The intellectual engagement that characterized this planning process provided psychological empowerment that exceeded anything available through traditional support systems. The systematic approach that guided this strategic development validated the importance of comprehensive preparation and professional expertise application for addressing complex personal challenges. The forensic accounting capabilities that had been developed during my formal career and refined through years of observation were now being applied to protect family interests while ensuring that systematic misconduct would face appropriate consequences. The strategic planning process demonstrated how intellectual capability could overcome emotional vulnerability while achieving outcomes that purely emotional responses could never accomplish. The comprehensive framework that emerged from this planning phase would guide implementation activities that would transform apparent vulnerability into decisive strategic advantage through methodical application of professional expertise and systematic preparation. The months of patient investigation and evidence gathering had created positioning that would enable optimal outcomes while ensuring that Michael and Victoria's comfortable deception would encounter responses they could never have anticipated from the woman they had consistently underestimated. The strategic plan that resulted from this comprehensive analysis incorporated multiple simultaneous objectives, including immediate protection of family assets, systematic exposure of criminal misconduct, professional consequences for ethical violation, and long-term security for Emma's educational future. The framework provided clear guidance for transitioning from investigation to action while maintaining optimal positioning for all subsequent phases of the resolution process. The sophisticated nature of the strategic response that I had developed would soon demonstrate to Michael and Victoria that their systematic exploitation of family trust and resources had activated capabilities they had never suspected existed within the domestic environment they had chosen to betray. The comfortable assumptions that had governed their affair would be subjected to strategic analysis and methodical dismantling that would prove the inadequacy of their risk assessment and operational security measures. The planning phase that had consumed weeks of intensive analysis and preparation had created comprehensive frameworks for achieving justice while protecting family interests through the systematic application of professional expertise to personal challenges. The strategic approach that would guide my transition from passive investigation to active intervention represented the culmination of capabilities that had been developed over decades and refined through circumstances that neither Michael nor Victoria had ever understood or appreciated. The first controlled revelation of my investigation findings occurred during what Michael assumed would be a routine discussion about Emma's college application requirements and associated financial planning. The strategic timing of this initial disclosure was designed to test his responses while providing opportunities to gauge his psychological state and defensive capabilities before implementing more comprehensive confrontation strategies. The careful orchestration of this revelation would determine the framework for all subsequent interactions and establish the psychological foundation for optimal strategic position. The setting that I selected for this initial confrontation represented a calculated choice designed to maximize psychological impact while maintaining controlled circumstances that would prevent emotional escalation or immediate defensive actions. The family study where we had conducted finance planning discussions throughout our marriage provided familiar surroundings that would create comfort and openness while simultaneously serving as the venue for revealing systematic betrayal and theft that violated every principle of family trust and financial responsibility. The documentation that I presented during this first revelation represented a carefully curated selection of evidence that demonstrated the scope of my investigation while withholding the most damaging materials for subsequent confrontations if cooperation was not forthcoming. The financial analysis that I had prepared showed clear patterns of asset diversion from Emma's educational accounts, while providing irrefutable documentation of systematic theft that could not be dismissed through casual explanations or minor justification. Michael's initial response to the presentation of evidence revealed psychological patterns and defensive strategies that validated the behavioral analysis I had conducted during months of observation. The progression from confidence to confusion to defensive anger followed predictable patterns that indicated limited capacity for sophisticated damage control or strategic counter-response. His immediate attempts to minimize the significance of the evidence demonstrated intellectual inadequacy for managing the complex legal and financial challenges that systematic revelation would create. The controlled nature of this first revelation allowed me to observe Michael's decision-making processes under stress while maintaining strategic advantage through the comprehensive evidence that remained undisclosed. His initial focus on developing explanations for individual transactions, then addressing the systematic nature of his misconduct, indicated psychological compartmentalization that would prove disadvantageous during more comprehensive confrontations, where the full scope of his betrayal would be systematically exposed.
The financial recovery demands that I presented during this initial confrontation were deliberately structured to test Michael's capacity for cooperation while providing clear pathways for resolution that could prevent more aggressive legal action. The immediate restoration of Emma's educational funding represented a non-negotiable requirement that would determine whether collaborative resolution remained possible or whether comprehensive legal proceedings would be necessary to protect family interests and ensure appropriate consequences. Victoria's involvement in the systematic theft became apparent through Michael's defensive responses and attempted explanations that inadvertently revealed the coordination and planning that had characterized their financial misconduct. The sophisticated money laundering techniques that had been employed to disguise asset transfers required capabilities that exceeded Michael's individual expertise, indicating collaborative planning and execution that expanded legal exposure beyond simple marital infidelity to encompass criminal conspiracy charges. The professional implications of the evidence that I presented during this revelation created immediate threats to Michael's career stability and advancement prospects at Sterling Capital Management. The documented violations of fiduciary responsibility and systematic theft from family accounts represented conduct that would result in immediate termination and potential criminal referral if reported to firm management or regulatory authority. The leverage that these professional consequences provided would prove essential for achieving cooperation and asset recovery. The psychological impact of discovering that his supposedly unsuspecting wife had conducted sophisticated forensic investigation of his activities created disorientation and defensive responses that revealed the fundamental inadequacy of his risk assessment and operational security measures. The systematic documentation of communications, financial transactions, and travel coordination demonstrated investigative capabilities that exceeded anything he had anticipated facing within his domestic environment. The strategic withholding of evidence related to Victoria's professional misconduct and potential criminal liability created additional psychological pressure while preserving leverage for subsequent negotiations or legal proceedings. The comprehensive analysis of her business activities and client relationships had revealed systematic ethical violations and potential criminal conduct that could destroy her career and result in serious legal consequences if properly documented and reported to appropriate authority. The immediate demands for financial transparency and account access that I presented during this revelation were designed to prevent further asset concealment, while providing mechanisms for monitoring ongoing activities that could affect family security. The sophisticated asset protection measures that Michael had already implemented suggested potential for additional concealment efforts if he suspected the full scope of my investigation, making immediate transparency requirements essential for preserving recovery options. The legal framework that I outlined during this confrontation provided clear pathways for resolution, while establishing consequences for non-cooperation that would result in comprehensive legal action and public exposure of systematic misconduct. The choice between collaborative resolution and adversarial litigation was presented as Michael's decision, while ensuring that either outcome would protect Emma's interests and provide appropriate consequences for systematic betrayal and theft. The communication protocols that I established during this revelation were designed to maintain strategic advantage while providing opportunities for Michael to demonstrate cooperation and good faith efforts toward resolution. The structured approach to ongoing discussions would prevent emotional manipulation or attempts to minimize the severity of his misconduct, while ensuring that all agreements would be properly documented and legally enforceable. The timeline requirements that I imposed for financial restoration and compliance with transparency demands created urgency that would prevent extended deliberation or strategic positioning that could compromise my advantage. The college application deadlines that drove these timing requirements provided natural justification for immediate action, while preventing Michael from implementing damage control measures that could affect asset recovery or evidence preservation. The motivational significance of this first revelation demonstrates how systematic preparation and professional expertise can transform apparent vulnerability into strategic control during high-stakes personal confrontation. The comprehensive evidence that I presented validated months of patient investigation while establishing psychological and legal advantages that would determine the framework for all subsequent interactions. The intellectual engagement that had characterized my investigation provided emotional strength and strategic clarity that enabled optimal performance during circumstances that could easily have compromised effectiveness. The controlled nature of this initial disclosure also validated the importance of strategic patience and comprehensive preparation rather than emotional confrontation or immediate response to betrayal discovery. The systematic approach that had guided my investigation enabled precise control over revelation, timing, and content, while preserving maximum leverage for achieving optimal outcomes. The professional capabilities that had been developed during my forensic accounting career provided frameworks for managing complex confrontations with strategic advantage rather than emotional vulnerability. The evidence presentation that occurred during this revelation established credibility and competency that would influence all subsequent negotiations and interactions. The sophisticated analysis and comprehensive documentation demonstrated intellectual capabilities that exceeded Michael's expectations while providing psychological foundation for his cooperation with recovery demands and transparency requirements. The strategic positioning that resulted from this controlled revelation would prove decisive for achieving optimal outcomes. The first revelation that occurred during this carefully orchestrated confrontation represented the beginning of Michael's recognition that his systematic betrayal and theft had activated capabilities he had never suspected existed within the family environment he had exploited. The comfortable assumptions that had governed his affair and financial misconduct were beginning to encounter systematic analysis and strategic response that would prove the inadequacy of his risk assessment and defensive preparation. The psychological transformation that began during this revelation would continue through subsequent confrontations as the full scope of my investigation and the comprehensive evidence of his systematic misconduct became apparent. The strategic framework that I had established during this initial disclosure would guide all future interactions while ensuring that his betrayal of family trust would face consequences appropriate to its severity and impact on Emma's future security and educational opportunity. The aftermath of my initial revelation created psychological dynamics that fundamentally altered the power structure within our household, while establishing the foundation for escalating demonstrations of investigative capability and strategic control. Michael's recognition that his supposed unsuspecting wife possessed sophisticated forensic accounting expertise and comprehensive evidence of his systematic misconduct initiated a transformation in his behavior patterns that validated the strategic advantages of methodical preparation over immediate emotional confrontation. The compliance efforts that Michael implemented following our first confrontation demonstrated his acknowledgement of the serious legal and professional consequences that systematic exposure would create. The immediate restoration of funds to Emma's educational accounts represented an initial gesture toward cooperation, while revealing his access to liquid assets that exceeded the amounts documented in our joint financial statement. This discovery of hidden resources provided additional evidence of systematic deception while creating opportunities for expanded asset recovery beyond the educational fund. The transparency measures that I required for ongoing monitoring of his activities revealed the sophisticated financial infrastructure that Michael had developed to support his dual lifestyle and concealed expenditure. The multiple credit facilities, investment accounts, and banking relationships that he disclosed during this compliance phase demonstrated planning and execution capabilities that exceeded simple impulse spending or casual financial indiscretion. The systematic nature of these arrangements provided evidence of premeditation that would prove valuable for legal proceedings, while establishing the scope of asset recovery requirements. Victoria's involvement in the financial arrangements became increasingly apparent through the documentation that Michael provided during his compliance effort. The coordinated account structures and synchronized transaction patterns revealed collaborative planning that elevated their misconduct from individual adultery to systematic conspiracy involving complex financial fraud and professional ethical violation. The evidence of her direct participation in asset diversion schemes created legal exposure that extended far beyond simple romantic involvement to encompass serious criminal liability. The professional consequences that began to emerge during this escalation phase demonstrated how systematic personal misconduct inevitably affects career stability and advancement prospects within industries that depend on trust and fiduciary responsibility. The irregular financial activities that my investigation had documented represented clear violations of Sterling Capital Management's compliance policies, while creating potential regulatory exposure that could affect the firm's reputation and client relationship. The leverage that these professional implications provided would prove essential for achieving comprehensive resolution while ensuring appropriate consequences for systematic betrayal. The psychological pressure that mounted during this recognition phase created behavioral changes in Michael that validated the effectiveness of strategic patience and comprehensive preparation over immediate confrontation. The systematic revelation of evidence through controlled disclosures maintained constant pressure while preventing adaptation or effective counter strategies that could have compromised my strategic position. The intellectual superiority that my professional training provided became increasingly apparent through each interaction as his defensive responses revealed limitations and vulnerability. The social implications of potential exposure began to affect Michael's behavior within our community and professional networks as he recognized the comprehensive nature of the evidence that could be disclosed if cooperation was not maintained. The reputation damage that would result from public revelation of systematic theft from his daughter's educational accounts represented consequences that extended far beyond immediate legal proceedings to encompass long-term career prospects and social relationships that had required decades to develop. The enhanced monitoring capabilities that I implemented during this phase provided real-time intelligence about Michael's activities and communications while preventing additional concealment efforts that could compromise asset recovery or evidence preservation. The sophisticated surveillance techniques that I employed drew upon forensic accounting methodologies while incorporating modern technology solutions that enabled comprehensive oversight without requiring constant, direct observation or confrontational interaction. The communication protocols that governed our interactions during this escalation phase were designed to maintain psychological pressure while providing clear pathways for continued cooperation and good faith compliance with recovery requirements. The structured approach to ongoing discussions prevented emotional manipulation or attempts to minimize the severity of his misconduct, while ensuring that all agreements would be properly documented with legal enforceability that could survive potential challenges or attempts at modification. The evidence expansion that occurred during this phase revealed additional dimensions of systematic deception that exceeded the scope of my initial investigation, while providing enhanced leverage for comprehensive resolution. The financial records that Michael disclosed under pressure revealed patterns of professional misconduct and regulatory violations that created potential criminal exposure, while demonstrating the sophisticated nature of his systematic betrayal and theft activity. The asset recovery operations that began during this recognition phase employed forensic accounting techniques that enabled systematic tracing and documentation of diverted family resources, while establishing clear pathways for restoration and protection of remaining assets. The complex money laundering schemes that Michael had employed to disguise his theft required equally sophisticated recovery methodologies that could overcome concealment efforts while providing legal documentation that would support enforcement actions if voluntary compliance was not maintained. The timeline acceleration that characterized this phase reflected the increasing urgency of college application requirements,
while demonstrating the effectiveness of strategic pressure in achieving cooperation and compliance with recovery demand. The natural deadlines that drove these timing requirements provided justification for aggressive action while preventing extended deliberation or strategic positioning that could have compromised optimal outcomes for Emma's educational future and our family's financial security. The professional network activation that I implemented during this escalation provided expert validation of my investigative findings while creating additional pressure for compliance through the potential involvement of regulatory authorities and law enforcement agencies. The forensic accounting colleagues, who reviewed my evidence analysis, confirmed the systematic nature of Michael's misconduct while providing expert opinions that would support legal proceedings if collaborative resolution proved inadequate for protecting family interests. The legal framework development that occurred during this phase established clear consequences for non-cooperation while providing structured pathways for resolution that could prevent more aggressive litigation if Michael continued to demonstrate good faith compliance with transparency and recovery requirements. The comprehensive legal strategy that emerged from this analysis incorporated multiple enforcement mechanisms while maintaining flexibility for adaptation based on evolving circumstances and emerging evidence. The motivational significance of this escalating recognition phase demonstrates how systematic preparation and professional expertise can create sustainable strategic advantages that compound over time rather than providing temporary tactical benefits. The comprehensive investigation that had preceded this phase enabled precise control over revelation, timing, and content, while maintaining psychological pressure that achieved cooperation without requiring adversarial litigation or public exposure that could have affected Emma's emotional well-being. The intellectual engagement that characterized this escalation validated the therapeutic value of professional capability application for addressing personal challenges and systematic betrayal. The forensic accounting expertise that I employed provided psychological empowerment and emotion control that exceeded what traditional support systems could have achieved, while protecting fundamental family interests through strategic action rather than passive victimization or emotional dysfunction. The systematic approach that guided this recognition phase also demonstrated how apparent vulnerability could be transformed into decisive control through methodical application of professional capabilities and comprehensive preparation. The months of patient investigation and evidence gathering had created positioning that enabled optimal outcomes while ensuring that Michael's systematic misconduct would face consequences appropriate to its severity and impact on family security and trust. The escalating recognition that characterized this phase established psychological foundations for continued cooperation while providing clear frameworks for resolution that would protect Emma's educational future and ensure appropriate consequences for systematic betrayal and theft. The strategic advantages that resulted from this methodical approach would prove decisive for achieving comprehensive resolution while validating the importance of intellectual capability and professional expertise for overcoming personal challenges and protecting fundamental family value. The transformation that occurred during this escalation demonstrated to Michael that his comfortable assumptions about his wife's capabilities and potential responses had been fundamentally inadequate for assessing the risks associated with systematic family betrayal and financial misconduct. The recognition that his actions had activated professional capabilities that he had never suspected or appreciated would continue to influence his behavior and cooperation throughout subsequent phases of the resolution process. The major challenge that would test the complete range of investigative capabilities and strategic planning emerged when Michael's compliance efforts revealed systematic financial irregularities at Sterling Capital Management that implicated both him and Victoria in a complex embezzlement scheme targeting client accounts. This discovery elevated their misconduct from personal betrayal and family theft to institutional fraud that could affect dozens of wealthy families while creating legal exposure that extended far beyond divorce proceedings to encompass serious federal criminal charges. The forensic analysis that I conducted following Michael's disclosure of his firm activities revealed sophisticated asset manipulation techniques that had diverted millions of dollars from client portfolios to accounts controlled by Michael and Victoria over an 18-month period. The systematic nature of these transfers demonstrated professional expertise and institutional access that suggested coordinated planning between multiple parties, while indicating potential involvement of other Sterling Capital employees in the broader fraud scheme. The complexity of the institutional fraud that my investigation uncovered required immediate expansion of my analytical framework to encompass regulatory compliance requirements, securities law violations, and federal criminal statutes that governed investment advisor misconduct. The forensic accounting methodologies that I had applied to personal financial analysis needed adaptation to address institutional scale fraud, while maintaining the comprehensive documentation standards that would support federal prosecution and civil recovery action. The client impact assessment that I developed during this investigation phase revealed that the systematic theft had affected retirement accounts, educational savings plans, and trust funds belonging to families throughout the Seattle metropolitan area. The victims included elderly investors who depended on their portfolios for living expenses, parents who had accumulated resources for their children's education, and disabled individuals whose trust funds provided essential financial security. The scope of harm created moral imperatives that transcended personal interest, while establishing stakes that demanded comprehensive resolution. Victoria's role in the institutional fraud proved far more sophisticated than her involvement in Michael's personal financial misconduct, revealing professional capabilities and criminal intent that elevated her legal exposure to levels that could result in decades of federal imprisonment. The marketing consulting business that had provided cover for her relationship with Michael actually served as the operational center for client solicitation and account manipulation schemes that demonstrated systematic criminal enterprise rather than opportunistic misconduct. The evidence preservation requirements that emerged from this institutional fraud discovery demanded enhanced security measures and legal protocols that could withstand federal investigation while maintaining admissibility standards for potential criminal prosecution. The documentation that I had gathered during my personal investigation needed supplementation with additional technical analysis and expert validation that could support institutional-scale legal proceedings involving multiple agencies and jurisdictions. The regulatory notification obligations that accompanied discovery of institutional fraud created immediate timeline pressures that required careful coordination with federal authorities while protecting my own legal position and ensuring optimal outcomes for affected clients. The Securities and Exchange Commission, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and state regulatory agencies that would investigate the Sterling Capital fraud scheme required comprehensive briefings that demonstrated my cooperation while establishing my role as victim rather than participant in the systematic misconduct. The professional network activation that this major challenge required exceeded anything I had implemented during my personal investigation, involving coordination with federal prosecutors, regulatory investigator and forensic accounting specialists who possessed expertise in institutional fraud examination. The complexity of the Sterling Capital scheme demanded collaborative analysis that could develop comprehensive understanding of the fraud mechanisms while ensuring that all criminal participants faced appropriate prosecution. The asset recovery operations that would be necessary for protecting affected clients required sophisticated understanding of federal asset forfeiture procedures and civil recovery mechanisms that could overcome complex concealment efforts while providing restitution for systematic theft. The forensic accounting techniques that I had applied to personal financial analysis needed expansion to address institutional-scale asset tracing while coordinating with federal agencies that possessed specialized capabilities for complex financial investigation. The psychological pressure that this institutional fraud discovery created for Michael and Victoria exceeded anything that personal exposure could have generated, activating federal criminal liability that could result in lengthy prison sentences while destroying any possibility of plea negotiations or reduced consequence. The systematic nature of their institutional misconduct eliminated options for minimization or rationalization, while creating legal exposure that extended far beyond civil proceedings to encompass serious criminal charges. The timeline acceleration that accompanied federal investigation requirements created urgency that demanded immediate strategic decisions about cooperation and disclosure while maintaining protection for Emma's emotional well-being and educational future. The complexity of federal criminal proceedings required long-term planning that could accommodate extended investigation periods while ensuring that family interests remained protected throughout the comprehensive legal process. The communication strategy that this major challenge demanded required careful coordination with federal authorities while maintaining strategic control over disclosure timing and content that could affect both criminal prosecution and civil recovery efforts. The sophisticated nature of the Sterling Capital fraud scheme created multiple stakeholder interests that required balanced consideration while prioritizing protection of affected clients and ensuring appropriate consequences for systematic criminal misconduct. The evidence integration characterized this phase required combination of my personal investigation findings with institutional documentation that could support comprehensive understanding of the fraud scheme while demonstrating the connections between personal misconduct and professional criminal activity. The systematic approach that had guided my individual analysis provided frameworks for managing complex multi-jurisdictional investigations while maintaining optimal positioning for family protection and client recovery. The motivational significance of this major challenge demonstrates how personal betrayal can reveal systematic misconduct that affects broader communities while creating opportunities for meaningful contribution to justice and victim protection. The forensic accounting expertise that I had developed during my professional career and refined through personal investigation proved essential for uncovering institutional fraud that federal authorities might have required months to identify through traditional investigation. The intellectual engagement that this institutional challenge provided exceeded anything available through personal resolution alone, validating the therapeutic value of professional capability application while achieving outcomes that protected dozens of families from continued financial exploitation. The systematic approach that had characterized my investigation enabled identification and documentation of complex fraud schemes while positioning me to contribute meaningfully to federal prosecution efforts and client protection initiatives. The strategic positioning that resulted from this major challenge discovery transformed me from individual victim to key witness and expert contributor in federal criminal proceedings that would affect multiple jurisdictions while establishing precedents for institutional fraud prosecution. The professional recognition that accompanied this transference validated decades of expertise development while providing platforms for expanded contribution to forensic accounting practice and financial crime prevention. The comprehensive resolution that this institutional challenge would ultimately require exceeded anything that personal divorce proceedings could have achieved, creating opportunities for systematic reform of investment advisor oversight while ensuring that Michael and Victoria's criminal misconduct would face consequences appropriate to its scope and impact. The federal prosecution that would result from this discovery would provide justice for affected clients while validating the importance of comprehensive investigation and systematic evidence gathering for exposing complex financial crime. The institutional fraud that my investigation had uncovered represented the ultimate validation of strategic patience and comprehensive preparation over immediate emotional response to personal betrayal. The systematic approach that had guided my analysis enabled discovery of criminal misconduct that exceeded personal family impact while creating opportunities for meaningful contribution to justice and client protection that would affect dozens of families throughout the region. The strategic counterattack that I launched following the discovery of institutional fraud represented the culmination of months of systematic investigation and comprehensive preparation, transforming apparent vulnerability into decisive advantage through the methodical application of forensic accounting expertise and federal law enforcement coordination. The sophisticated response framework that I implemented exceeded anything that Michael and Victoria could have anticipated from their systematic underestimation of my professional capabilities and strategic thinking. The comprehensive evidence package that I presented to federal authorities demonstrated the interconnected nature of personal misconduct and institutional fraud while providing detailed roadmaps for asset recovery and criminal prosecution. The forensic analysis that I had conducted independently provided federal investigators with investigative leads and evidence documentation that would have required months of traditional examination to develop, accelerating the timeline for protective action while ensuring optimal outcomes for affected clients and family interests. The coordination with Securities and Exchange Commission investigators required sophisticated understanding of regulatory requirements and evidence standards while maintaining strategic control over disclosure timing and content. The systematic approach that had characterized my investigation provided frameworks for federal cooperation that protected my legal position while maximizing the impact of evidence revelation on criminal prosecution efforts and civil recovery initiatives.
The Federal Bureau of Investigation briefings that I conducted demonstrated the scope and sophistication of the Sterling Capital fraud scheme, while establishing my credibility as expert witness and investigative resource for comprehensive prosecution efforts. The professional competency that I displayed during these federal interactions validated decades of forensic accounting expertise, while positioning me for expanded involvement in institutional fraud examination and prevention initiatives. The asset freeze operations that federal authorities implemented based on my investigation findings prevented further client losses, while preserving resources for comprehensive recovery efforts that would benefit dozens of affected families. The sophisticated asset tracing techniques that I had developed during my personal investigation provided federal agencies with methodologies that could overcome complex concealment efforts while ensuring optimal recovery outcomes for systematic theft victims. The psychological impact of federal intervention on Michael and Victoria exceeded anything that personal confrontation could have achieved, activating criminal liability that eliminated options for plea negotiations or reduced consequences. The transformation from personal betrayal to federal prosecution created psychological pressure that revealed their fundamental inadequacy for managing complex legal challenges, while demonstrating the strategic advantages of comprehensive preparation and professional capability application. The media management strategy that accompanied federal prosecution required careful coordination with law enforcement agencies, while protecting Emma's privacy and emotional well-being throughout the comprehensive investigation process. The sophisticated approach to public disclosure that I developed balanced transparency requirements with family protection, while ensuring that systematic criminal misconduct received appropriate attention and consequence. The client notification protocols that federal agencies implemented based on my analysis provided affected families with immediate information about theft discovery, while establishing pathways for recovery and restitution that could restore financial security and investment confidence. The systematic approach to victim communication that emerged from this coordination demonstrated how individual investigation could contribute to broader protection and recovery efforts. The professional recognition that accompanied my federal cooperation exceeded anything available through traditional career advancement, while validating the strategic value of maintaining expertise and professional identity during periods of apparent professional inactivity. The forensic accounting capabilities that had been dismissed or forgotten by others proved essential for exposing institutional fraud while contributing meaningfully to justice and victim protection efforts. The Sterling Capital Management investigation that resulted from my evidence disclosure revealed systematic compliance failures and oversight inadequacies that had enabled the fraud scheme, while creating regulatory reforms that would protect future clients from similar exploitation. The institutional changes that emerged from federal prosecution efforts demonstrated how individual action could contribute to systematic improvement, while ensuring appropriate consequences for criminal misconduct. The recovery operations that I coordinated with federal authorities employed advanced forensic accounting techniques that enabled comprehensive asset tracing and documentation while providing optimal outcomes for affected clients and family interests. The sophisticated methodologies that I had developed during personal investigation proved scalable to institutional analysis, while demonstrating the therapeutic value of intellectual engagement and professional capability application. The testimony preparation that characterized this counterattack phase required comprehensive organization of evidence and analysis, while developing presentation frameworks that could support criminal prosecution and civil recovery proceedings. The systematic approach that had guided my investigation enabled effective expert witness performance, while contributing meaningfully to federal prosecution efforts that would affect multiple jurisdictions and regulatory agencies. The timeline coordination that federal prosecution required demanded careful balancing of investigation needs with family protection and educational planning requirements that could not be compromised despite the complexity of criminal proceedings. The strategic framework that I had developed provided guidance for managing competing priorities while ensuring optimal outcomes for Emma's future security and educational opportunity. The emotional regulation that this counterattack phase demanded exceeded anything required during personal investigation, while demonstrating the psychological benefits of intellectual engagement and systematic action over passive victimization or emotional dysfunction. The professional validation that accompanied federal cooperation provided therapeutic value that exceeded traditional support systems while achieving practical outcomes that protected fundamental family interests. The legal strategy development that characterized this phase required coordination with multiple agencies and jurisdictions, while maintaining strategic control over timing and tactics that could affect both criminal prosecution and civil recovery efforts. The comprehensive framework that emerged from this coordination provided optimal positioning for family protection, while ensuring that systematic criminal misconduct would face consequences appropriate to its scope and impact. The network effects that resulted from federal prosecution efforts extended beyond immediate case resolution to encompass regulatory reform and industry oversight improvements that would protect future clients from similar exploitation. The systematic changes that emerged from this prosecution demonstrated how individual action could contribute to institutional improvement, while validating the importance of comprehensive investigation and evidence preservation for exposing complex financial crime. The motivational significance of this strategic counterattack demonstrates how systematic preparation and professional expertise can transform personal betrayal into meaningful contribution to justice and victim protection. The forensic accounting capabilities that I had maintained and refined during years of apparent professional inactivity proved essential for exposing institutional fraud, while providing psychological empowerment that exceeded anything available through traditional therapeutic approach. The intellectual engagement that characterized this counterattack validated the strategic value of maintaining professional identity and capability development, even during periods when external recognition appears absent or irrelevant. The expertise that I had preserved during years of domestic focus provided frameworks for addressing complex challenges while contributing meaningfully to outcomes that affected dozens of families and institutional reform efforts. The strategic positioning that resulted from this comprehensive counterattack transformed apparent vulnerability into decisive control while demonstrating the inadequacy of Michael and Victoria's risk assessment and defensive preparation capability. The systematic response that I had developed exceeded their capacity for effective countermeasures while ensuring that their criminal misconduct would face comprehensive consequences through federal prosecution and regulatory action. The vindication that accompanied successful federal prosecution efforts exceeded anything that personal divorce proceedings could have provided, while validating decades of professional development and strategic thinking. The transformation from overlooked wife to federal expert witness demonstrated the hidden potential that exists within individuals whose capabilities have been systematically underestimated or dismissed by others. The comprehensive resolution that emerged from this strategic counterattack provided justice for affected clients while protecting family interests through outcomes that exceeded anything achievable through traditional divorce litigation or personal confrontation. The federal prosecution that resulted from my investigation would ensure that Michael and Victoria's systematic criminal misconduct faced consequences appropriate to its scope while contributing to regulatory reforms that would protect future investment clients from similar exploitation. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.